Kirk Watson, he is the digital preservation specialist and works in the Digital Library Services Group and reports to Tanya Keller, who is the digital preservation manager in the Digital Library Services Department. And him and Cory are signed up to facilitate this session where we are going to have a discussion around the different digital library services systems that we're using, the asset management platform and the digital preservation platform. And I'll let you talk more about this, but I think Kirk just went to move his car and he said he was going to be back. So I'm guessing he should be back any second now.
He's leaving for a second.
Yes, before he left, he said he was just moving his car.
Okay,
So
we can get started.
right,
and then...
right, and then I'm sure he will join us.
Okay,
Right.
great.
And if you need my help until Kirk gets back, let me know what to do, and I can do that.
You know, the only thing I would suggest is, do we have somebody who's able to do notes during the session? I don't want to put too much fatigue on our two volunteers, but it might be good. I think it could be useful for our group to get a sense of who's using what systems right now. So our first question was just to go around the room and get a sense of what sort of digital library platforms people are currently using. So if maybe someone could record that for the notes, that would be great. Currently, I'll start, I guess, since I'm already talking. Currently at UNLV, we are still actively using the hosted content DM. We migrated to that out of necessity because our digital asset management task force decided we wanted to go with building our own platform, and that wasn't going to be ready quickly. So we've decided to go with Islandora Claw, which is a Fedora-based repository with Islandora on top. So that's in development, very early stages of development. We have a phased approach. We're hoping to get our Fedora instance up and running and ingest most of our materials and get our preservation workflows worked out first in the very first phase. And then we're going to move on to the metadata management phase and finally work on the public interface last. So that's the status at UNLV. We're kind of in a hybrid content DM / new DAMs development situation. So would anybody else like to volunteer to talk about what you're using right now?
Sure. At Oregon State, we're using, well, right now for Oregon Digital, we're using Hydra, and we're planning a migration to Hyrax, which is a Sambera product. It's a platform. Then we also, at Oregon State, we also have an institutional repository that's based on Hyrax, so we feel like we have a good background in what's going to happen when we start moving our dams over. So
Great. So just for the microphone, I'll just repeat that they are using Hydra, planning a migration to Hyrax, and you also have an IR based in Hydra at Oregon State. Other folks? Jeremy.
So we've talked about it several times at these meetings, but the University of Utah is using our homegrown system, SolFal, built off open source platforms, Solar, Falcon, Nginx. But then one semi-recent development, I guess I could have Harish talk about that, is that Harish and Brian McBride were awarded an IMLS grant to look at the Sambera community for newspapers.
Yeah. So I think we are on a similar track to, I think it's Oregon State, right, what they mentioned. Right now we are, one of our biggest collections is the Utah Digital Newspapers collection. So we are in the process of migrating the collection from SolFal to what would be somewhere. And it's one of the gems that we are starting with is the Hyrax. Okay. And potentially 2-3 years down the line, we see all the collections hopefully going on to the same platform. We also use it for, right now we use Sophia for managing our data repository. So we have data sets. And that's something that we are starting to see in different places too. So that's
I actually was not aware that you were using Sophia already, or is this for institutional repository?
for the data Hive.
For the Hive.
Which is the
data management through the Digital Matters Lab?
No, this is different. This is for just managing the data for archiving the research data sets that our faculty generate.
Okay. One question actually I have, I don't know, is it okay to ask?
Sure,
questions?
please. Yeah, we can have this be pretty informal.
Very
Yeah.
informal. So how is the soul file different from Symvera right now? 'Cause I know you mentioned that the idea is to migrate
Right.
to Symvera platform.
Yeah, I think in terms of functionality, it's the same, but it's just the community-driven aspects that we are more interested in. Right now, SoulFile, we are the only developers and developing product, but in terms of the components that go behind SoulFile, it's the same infrastructure. Right? It uses the Solar, Fedora. So I think what we are looking for is the community involvement. So in our efforts on the use cases projects, we are looking to give back something to the community. At the same time, try to use the same sort of infrastructure components that everyone else is using.
Yeah, because I think a lot of us get a little bit confused when we talk about, this is maybe a question for the audience in general who are more familiar with Symvera. What does it exactly mean to be on Symvera? Is it that you're contributing your code to GitHub, one, or two, is it, I know there's this, I'm hearing Ruby on Rails, if that's a language that's used to develop new code, is that another component of
It's
being
just
through Symvera
Yeah, I mean, if you
platform?
I think maybe having a session on Symvera at some point might be useful. Ways to get involved in the community too. But contributing code is not a requirement to participate in Symvera, right? It's an open framework. There are ways to get involved. Folks, they can help with documentation. They can help with testing. There are many ways to get involved. But Symvera itself is a product and an idea too. It's about doing things together, get the buy-in from the community, and put resources where needed. Ruby on Rails is just the language.
It's not, it doesn't matter what you actually use to develop the code and the gem, modify the gems.
Yeah, one thing we arrived at after way too long in our digital asset management task force is that in the end we were more selecting a development community as opposed to selecting a product. So, or selecting, programming language or a thing. And so I think that sort of reflects that idea of what community do you want to jump into, and Symvera is definitely a very robust community. BYU, do you want to?
I'm the only one left.
Oh, okay.
So still currently for all of our manuscript collections, we're using hosted content DM as well. There have been rumblings about wanting to think of other options, but nothing that's actually actionable at this point. So that's still what we're relying on at the moment. I mean, we also put a lot of material in Internet Archive and use that as a hosting service of sorts, but not quite the same thing.
Are you using Internet Archives also for your preservation?
No, we have, we actually, for doing preservation, we have Rosetta, actually. We have, and we have a separate full-time staff member who is, he just manages our long-term preservation. We put collections that we've deemed in need of long-term digital preservation into Rosetta, which he also offloads onto off-site storage, as well as we're starting to use some cloud storage as our third option. We've previously been relying on MDisks as the third media format, but it'll be a lot more flexible to use the cloud storage instead.
Are you going with a local cloud storage in-house or like Amazon Web Services?
I believe what they've been talking about is using Box, because all of BYU basically bought into Box, where every employee, every student has actually unlimited Box access while they're affiliated with the university. And so we have kind of our admin set up where we have file directories that are permanent, to the library and things like that. And I believe they're actually using Box for that, since we already mass bought into it. it was more cost effective than using a different one, so that is off-site, it's third party.
Okay.
It doesn't work for anything that's, I'm trying to remember the term for the restrictions, like we can't have certain types of personal information in it, but.
Like HIPAA?
Yes, that's what it was. Yeah, so we can't do anything that has HIPAA concerns, but otherwise it's fair game.
Others? State Library?
The state library is still using Novation. We first learned about Novation back in 2005 from Southern Oregon University, and we've been using it since 2006. We're using version 5. One of the plans that I have is sometime between now and the fall to release the Novation interface. We're still using the old archivalware UX, and so we want to open up, publicize the new interface. Our long-term plan, 15 months ago, we decided that we were going to migrate from Novation. Novation we're using it for state publications. It's used similarly by the state of Wyoming, New York, and New Hampshire for their state publication repositories. The state of Utah uses it for the Department of Corrections, and the Department of Transportation just started using Novation as of January. They're just implementing now. It's really good for integrating disparate databases and providing a common interface to it, particularly strong in geospatial type of interfaces. And a lot of federal agencies use it for geospatial agencies. However, we still are looking, 15 months ago we started looking to possibly migrate to another platform. We're really interested in Islandora and a product out of France called Lim Gallery, which is a proprietary system that's being used by the LDS Church in their book history, family history collection, so it's really promising. But everything's kind of on hold. Our department is now doing an audit to see, to kind of evaluate digital library services, and as a result, kind of as a result of internal politics, our prime mover has quit, and we have 2 big job openings now for program managers, if anybody's interested. And so everything's kind of on hold right now until we get the politics resolved.
The LIMS services, you said?
It's called Lim Gallery, and it's actually a suite of products. They have a product that's very similar to
I was
the.
gonna say
LIM software
the
that.
Curitas
Yeah.
LIM software.
Yeah. There's Lim Processing, which is very similar to their SIM
Is
tool.
it under the same company?
Yeah, it's the same company, the I2S, the company out of France. And some of you, if you've gone to ALA or some of the conventions, Rootstep, they've been there, Rootstep too.
UNR, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, we went with a hosted solution. With Islandora, we went with a vendor to help us migrate and configure our Islandora setup. If any of you have heard of Discovery Garden, they were really amazing. They were fabulous to work with. And yeah, that's pretty much the story. That's been our story, I should say, for the last 4 months, because even though we had a vendor helping us through this, we did have to go clean our data. We converted all of our Dublin core to mods, and we had to deal with interesting legacy problems, and we also hired a digital archivist this spring because we did not have any sort of digital preservation program in place either. So I was telling these guys that, yeah, we were hunting people down and saying, where are the master files? Because nobody had stored them, and it'd be like, oh, it's on this external hard drive someplace. This is the sort of thing we've been doing. And not everything migrated over, but the most important stuff did. We are having to do some interesting things, like our maps collection was not able to migrate, so we're redoing that. And it was a very popular collection, so what we decided to do for some of our collections is not migrate, but build them from scratch, once we have Islandora in place, because it's the only way we could do it. And we at least found the map files, it's just the metadata didn't point, it was terrible. And so we've been having an adventure, and in the meantime, Special Collections also migrated from Archivist Toolkit to Archive Space, so we're just busy. But that's what we're doing, and at this point, we've migrated all of the collections that we were going to migrate, except one. In addition, because we wanted to make this really exciting, we had been hosting everything on our Content DM server. Our server was 12 years old, and IT told us, we are pulling your plug on June 30th. And we actually used that to our advantage, because that is how I finally got permission from the dean to actually migrate to a new system. And whenever we would come up against, well, we can't get to this for a couple of months, we'd say, well, no, actually, they're pulling the plug on June 30th. And we went right up to the mark. You know, it was like 4 o'clock on that Friday before June 30th. What was it? I think it was June 29th. And we were still working on this, but it happened, and you know, here we are, and we've been talking to Teresa. I mentioned this earlier about getting our stuff into Mountain West Digital Library. So that's what we're doing.
We were very surprised when you actually told us you had migrated, because how many people give us a timeline, and it's like, oh, you know.
I know, it takes forever.
6 months later. Or
Like I told you 5 years ago, we were migrating.
Right.
But any words of wisdom for those of us that are looking to migrate to Islandora? Is there anything that you would plan differently, or anything that we should be thinking about while planning for that migration? I know you said Discovery Garden, great to work with, but
Yes.
other than that.
It's all about the metadata. You know, having that, especially since we went to mods, and it's just so much more unforgiving than Dublin Core. It really came down to the biggest hurdles we had, the biggest obstacles we had to overcome were configuring our metadata so that it would work. And I would say that was the hardest part. Putting all of our solar configuration and making all of when you build something like Islandora, we did not have the manpower to build the plumbing. So that's what Discovery Garden did with us, but it was still good for us to have somebody on our side that could kind of understand the plumbing, or really understand the plumbing, to say, no, it's not working on our end. So even if you're short-staffed and you're like, oh, I'll just have a vendor take care of that, no, you really do need to have at least one person that has worked with open source tools and knows how to plug those things in. But yeah, metadata, oh gosh. And we had been cleaning our data, so we thought we were in pretty good shape, actually. And some of the collections were, but it's still, even when you think everything is clean, it probably isn't. So yeah, clean your metadata. That's the lesson, I think.
And one other thing, I know that the Marriott Library was doing their asset management systems review. The questions that we would ask the vendors, or if there was an open source collaboration that we were thinking of, working on. And what are the barriers to exit? What if, 5 years down the road, you're like, now this hydropocalypse thing is out there. Our Islandora, instances, not, holding up with the kind of data that we have and the kind of volume that we have.
Right.
So I don't know if that's something that you've been talking about as well. What does it take to migrate off of, Islandora? I'm just curious if it's a simple thing that's exporting like separate CSV file with the metadata and then lining it up with.
Actually, yeah. It is, yes,
Very
that's
simple.
exactly what you do there. And that is something also that we did, is we backed up everything so that if we ever have to migrate again, and we probably will. I mean, we're on Islandora, but Cory was talking about, Claude is the next thing. And Claude is built on Fedora 4.
Yeah, and it's RDF based, so we're
Right.
not even talking the same language. Like,
Yeah.
we really, Nevada wanted to work together, but because the systems are built differently, that's a few years in the future, I think.
It is. I mean, and that is one thing that we considered, is like, okay, well, we're gonna implement this this now, but in 3 or 4 years, we are going to have to revisit this because
Yeah.
we will need to do something else, and then it will be another migration. But, you know, now.
Our metadata is clean now.
Our metadata is clean, and we have extremely strict standards going forward. You know, there've been some changes, there've been culture changes, there've been departmental changes, so that now all of our metadata goes through our metadata and cataloging department, whereas before we would have different creators and special collections, and it's not happening anymore. It's
Very
all.
organic. Well, it used to be very
It's
organic.
locked down, yeah,
Well, that's great.
yeah.
And actually, I don't know, Jeremy, I'm sorry if I'm pointing to you, but I want to talk a little bit about your quality control process because of the SIM tool. You know, I mean, you kind of have the same sort of.
Yeah, so any
quality check.
metadata that's created for new collections in the SIM tool, we have a process for reviewing that before it's submitted. And really, it's Anna's responsibility now for reviewing that and approving metadata before it can be submitted to the digital library.
For Marriott
our
Library
collections.
Marriott Library
Collection.
collections. For all of us.
No, I mean, there's still external partners that
Mhm.
do their own thing within the SIM tool, so I'm not reviewing what the Uinta County Library does.
But we do have controlled vocabularies in place.
We do,
right?
one of the
So,
things that
exactly.
we were happy to do was, have some more controlled vocabularies in place and enforced by our, metadata management tool. So that's handy for those few things like language and format, so, we don't have 20 different ways of expressing English in our digital library repository anymore, so that was good.
So, just wanted to ask about the conversion from Dublin core to mods. I'm assuming that Islander supports multiple metadata formats?
I believe so, but Discovery Garden highly recommended that we convert to mods, and it was something that we wanted to do.
Oh, you want?
Anyway, just because it, would communicate better across, like, archive space, I guess.
Our staff is arguing with their staff over their choice. Because UNR and UNLV are rivals in everything, including metadata standards.
Right. I know. I was fine with that, of course. But I do believe that it has the potential, or it has the capability to handle both of them. And do you know what I'm wondering now is when we talked to Discovery Garden, is that a requirement? This was like 6 months ago when we talked to them, and I'm kind of thinking that Discovery Garden said, this is what we do, we convert it to mods, because it works better for their hosting system where, but if we would have pushed it and said, well, we don't want to go to mods, maybe they would have let us do it. That conversation happened a long time ago, but it's a very good question.
Do we know, Salt Lake Community College has gone to Islandora. They're self-hosting, they're not using Discovery Garden. Are they using Dublin Core mods, and they've been successfully harvested, and will that learning experience, with Salt Lake Community College help Amy as far as their harvest?
Yeah, to that point, I would say we did have some good findings from their harvesting. A brief overview is they were first harvested off of Islandora when Sandra was still here, and we got to work successfully. And then sometime in 2017, they had a change on their system that they are self-hosting that changed how the OAI feed was presented, and it broke the harvesting. And it took us kind of a long time to get it sorted out. We came to a compromise this spring about how they were doing the naming of their collections, and that it's data, and it's information I have passed on to both UNR, but also to UNLV, since we're considering outdoor as well. So far, from what I've seen, at least with my very brief testing with UNR's new system, it is working correctly. There's some other things to sort out, but going forward, I think it's going to be okay.
Are there others that want to weigh in on the systems you're using? Yes, you do.
So majority of our digital archives is on hosted content DM. We're getting really close to 1 million items on there. And then, and we don't really have any plans of changing that anytime soon. Speaking of metadata, the way that we've handled that is I'm the only person who does it. So even though I sometimes have help like preparing and uploading and stuff, I just save that for myself. So I know, which doesn't mean I've been doing it so long. There have been changes over the years. So like I know this last time I was working with Teresa, I said, oh, I forgot the geospatial. So let me get it back in there because it just wasn't part of my workflow yet. Another portion of our digital collections is in the name indexes, which, as I already mentioned, is hosted by Axiom. So that's spelled A-X-A-E-M, and it's kind of our core system. And I mean, the name indexes is a pretty simple part of it. It started out in some other like online database type programming, and then was integrated into this one. And it for that it's not even to any metadata standard. It's literally just like name fields, date fields, place fields, and then a field with a hyperlink to a plain image. And so what we've started doing is for any new ones over the last couple of years, we've turned that link into a direct link in Content DM, so that not only we don't have to duplicate it in 2 different places on the server, but also to keep the archival context. Because yes, the name you're looking for is on page 13, but maybe you want to browse through 12 and 14 and look at the rest of the register book. So that's kind of enabled us to do that. And it's kind of related because Axiom has some preservation modules, which we are not currently using, but we could. It's all under consideration right now. We've done some internal reorganization, and we now have, I guess you'd call her electronic records archivist, because we really need that. I mean, when's the last time you typed a letter on paper? Everyone's using electronic records, including all government. And so her focus is on what we call born digital. And so as far as the digitized stuff goes, I'm still working on the interim solution of MDIS. So we're essentially creating submission information packages with Bagot, and then we put it on MDIS so that we can at least get it off of our working storage, because it's limited for us. The state charges really high rates for that. So when we say we need like 10 terabytes, they're like, why? Because we're trying to scan a lot of things. And so digital preservation is still coming, but hopefully soon. I feel like I've been waiting like 10 years for it, but it'll happen.
Are you doing a review for that, or?
Well, so what we did is last year we actually did a request for information in the purchasing process, and we got a couple of replies back from like the top products that are out there. And what it became obvious is that our little division in state government can't be the sole responsibility for preserving any kind of electronic or digital asset produced by all of state government. Like, it's just too much for us. So instead of selecting one of those products, or even continuing with the Axiom modules, which have been developed in-house actually for a number of years, and are they're all OAIS based, pretty solidly done, we decided that we needed to run it up to more of a statewide enterprise level and say, here is what the state of Utah is doing to preserve these assets, especially if they are considered records of enduring value, permanent or whatever like that, even though long-term is more likely than permanent.
And the Axiom platform that you have, you actually really, you configured that, right, in use?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of work on it over the years. We use it for description also, so a lot of the same functions as archive space.
We also use it for retention schedules, for records management, and it has quite a web presence also. So if you go on our website, a lot of what you're gonna click around is actually generated from that database, so that you're interacting with the live data. And it is an open source product. It's based on the Apex platform, so the company or vendor behind it is Apex, APPX. They're out of Florida. And there are other states that are using the Axiom product, so they've kind of developed their own version of it, and then there's a little bit of code sharing, but it's not through anything. They have started using GitHub for documentation, but I don't think they're using code on there yet, because I think they just kind of work through the vendor, and there's a users group, but that includes North Carolina, Indiana, Washington DC, the city government, and then the Duke University Medical Archives are the other users.
Utah Valley, Weber State, any comments?
We're continuing to someday, it will happen before the end of 2018, the move to Archivematica, and then I'll know more. I mean, it's metadata and getting it all in the right way to then make that big move, and so until we get everything ready to go, I feel like there's not a lot I can share until we get there.
But you are moving from Content DM.
Oh, no, Content DM, we are hosted with Content DM,
Right,
and
now
that
you're-
continues. But as far as long-term storage of our digital items and all of that, that's going to be moved into Archivematica.
But you also recently went through the migration from self-hosted
Yes.
Content DM hosted. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, it was honestly, and I've told these guys, less painful than I even imagined. I mean, we put it off for a long time, and I kept talking to BYU, and Scott kept saying, it's not as bad as you think, and I was like, yeah, whatever. And, but it really was so much less painful than I expected it to be, and monetarily more manageable than we even dreamed it could be. And so it's been a burden off of our poor one IT man that was just constantly having to deal with breakdowns. And
Can I ask?
Go ahead.
Can I ask? I don't want to get into a Content DM bashing session, but has your service been pretty good in the hosted?
Do you know what? It has never been this good.
Yeah.
Really?
Oh, it's never been better.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of issues since we migrated.
You have?
With
Oh.
indexing problems and.
It does come up occasionally, yes.
But nothing like what we were dealing with before, so we haven't.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Well,
Yeah.
we had so much trouble with IT support that we ended up like 8 versions behind of the latest Content DM, to the point where their technical support was saying, this is dangerous, you need to upgrade. And I'd be like, well, do you have $4,000 to send over? Because that's what our IT department is saying they're gonna charge for an upgrade. And then, of course, that was like, that's all that it cost for like a year's worth of hosting with OCLC, so.
So I didn't know you had moved to hosted. So are you not finding their support?
Yeah, they're just like, sorry, it's on your end. And I'm like, wait, that's what we thought you
Well,
wouldn't be
there
able to
is no
say
end.
anymore.
That's weird.
But yeah, I think it has to do with some of our larger collections. We've just scaled up a lot, and they're kind of like, well, you know, how big are your compound objects? And we're like, well, they have like 300 things in them. And they're like, well, you probably shouldn't do that. And we're like, but that's what we do. So
That's what our stuff is.
it's been a little, I think it's a scaling kind of
I
situation.
think compound objects, as we've discussed, is their one thing that they're trying to manage and get on top of.
Well, but they're not doing very
But-
well in that way.
Right.
Because we're still not on the responsive interface because they don't have full compound object support, and that's
Yeah, that's
99%
another
of our stuff. So we would actually lose some amount of usability.
Right.
And so I'm just waiting for them, and, you know, I
Yeah.
popped into their office hours and said, waiting, and we said, yeah, we know.
Yeah.
But I can index without everything breaking every day, so that's new.
Volume of your digital collections is getting a sense of, for all of us, how many collections and how many objects are we talking about compared to,
Oh.
so we can make comparison, you know, so because you're saying that. Because what I was hearing when I was getting feedback from going hosted, with large volume collections, large digital libraries, the index wasn't as, you know, obviously that would make sense.
Well, and I worried about the newspaper collection because, I don't know, there's 2,500 newspapers in there, you know, and they're all compound. And I was concerned that would break, but it's done okay, it's been okay. So.
It probably helps if you don't have to change it too much. So the nature of our materials is, we put it up once, and we don't need to update anything. 'Cause,
Oh
I mean,
yeah, we're constantly, we got a new metadata librarian, so we're redoing
Yeah, so
everything.
you're doing a lot of stuff. 'Cause I know I've
So-
got a collection, the newer one that gave me all the huge numbers for the legislature's last 2 years. I mean, that's 225,000 items in
Yeah.
one collection, and I don't know how many objects, because it was probably about 50 per object or something. And yeah, I would be worried if I had to index that collection, because I'd be like,
Yeah.
oh, I hope it'll be okay. But I don't really need to, because it doesn't change. It's still, you know, from the 1800s.
Utah Valley?
We are just barely beginning the process of moving to Content DM hosted.
Okay.
So, it has yet to.
So we'll cross our fingers for you.
Thank you. So far, their support has been really good via email. When I have questions, I get a quick response. So.
Yeah, on my end, the migration went awesome.
Oh.
It was like almost too good to be true. So I think the migration, actually, their process is pretty good.
But then once you're up and posted,
Well,
then the response is not so
yeah,
great.
I think it depends very much on both the size
Yeah.
and in some cases the age of your digital collections. Just in terms of some of the blips that I remember seeing
Yeah.
with hosted content.
I don't know if anyone else ever has those ghost records that
Yes.
never
Yes.
disappear. Yeah.
Or,
that's like my nightmare.
records that are mysteriously missing from the OAI feeds for no good reason, like that
Yeah.
happens.
So those are just some of the things
Yeah.
we've experienced. But
Oh, there were lots of those records on self-hosted, and I realized it would still be an issue on
Yeah.
hosted.
Yeah. So I think one of the things this conversation really reveals is how it's evolved from sort of a digital asset management system to lots of different modules of products doing and code and modules doing different functions, so preservation functions or metadata management functions or presentation or digital exhibits, or, you know, it's all related. One thing I learned in my task force was that we were not using a common vocabulary when we talked about what a digital asset management system should do. And I think that is revealed somewhat by our conversation. One thing I wanted to ask is if, we touched on it a little bit, but if anybody was currently using an OAIS compliant system for digital preservation, like, is anybody there yet with that in terms of your preservation workflows?
Do you want to explain exactly what the features of being completely OAIS compliant could mean without it being Kirk?
That was what Kirk was going to do. But it's basically based on the model of, you know, keeping your files, you know, authentic throughout the whole entire process of digital preservation using, should we show the should I bring it up maybe? I don't know if that would be helpful.
Escape.
Okay. Oh, sorry, it's on my computer. Does someone there are digital preservation experts here, I'm sure, who want to talk about this.
If anyone wants to chime in about what they know what it means to be OAS compliant. I know you need to have your data each year graphically
Yeah.
displays 3 different locations,
Yes.
3 different
I
locations.
think checksums.
Checksums.
Those are the easy, off the top of the head ones.
Yeah.
Like archival formats, there's a certain number of formats that has to, you know, be proven or suggested for longevity, like, you know, like PDFs or TIFFs or something like that, something that's pretty standardized.
Have the archive of those files that you're saying, you know, non-proprietary formats, right?
Yeah, that's kind of where you lean to, but sometimes you get into like architectural or something like that where they are very, you know, proprietary. So it's kind of a gray line, like depends on what you're archiving, your material and stuff like that. But yeah, that's the goal, to be non-proprietary. So you can open them in 50 years. You don't need that program on your computer to open, you know. What was another one? Just kind of thought of.
Do you want to add, Ray? And
Yeah,
we can come back?
One resource perhaps you want to check out, I mentioned to Cory and Kinza that today, the Government Publishing Office, the Federal Depository Library Program, was doing a webinar on trustworthy digital repositories. And part of being a trustworthy digital repository is incorporating the OAIS standard. And their webinars tend to be very understandable at a level that most people can grasp, and it might be worth checking out. They do record them. It was at noon today, so unfortunately it conflicted with our meeting here, but you might want to check out Federal Depository Library Program webinars. And it might be something.
That's a great
Yeah, I think
suggestion.
having a separate archival image, separate from your display image or
Right.
your active working one, so like has to be a separate location for something. Not something that's accessible from online, something that's separate. There's not very many, but some of them are really hard, like getting the geographical locations.
Yeah.
I think that's where the highest cost
Yeah.
factor comes in.
Because now one is web kind of recommended. Some people are like catching the web, the cloud wave, you know, so something, discs are kind of going out of the wayside, but a lot of people still use them, so, it's just one of those things. Discs are more affordable, web hosting is a lot more expensive, so that's a major hang up. Other stuff is really easy to do, and checksums, there's so many different kinds of open source software you can run checksums, which just means that if you open a file and you close it, it runs a check to make sure nothing was deleted or lost in that opening. Even removal, it tracks things from one location to another location to make sure nothing's lost.
Well, I know that, I don't think anyone over here, unless I'm wrong, is actually 100% OAIS compliant. I don't think, because especially the geographic disbursement of our data. But some of us are members of DEEPN, and is DEEPN considered OAIS compliant, Cory?
Yeah, I think that's one of the core principles behind the original reservation. That's why you have different nodes sitting in different parts of the country.
Does the Marriott Library have a certain percentage of their data in DEEPN, or is there, we're still on a trial version?
Yeah, we're less than 10 terabytes in DEEPN, and we have 200 terabytes in Rosetta.
Yeah. I mean, because of the way the DEEPN model works, so far they give us, with the basic membership, we can deposit 5 terabytes every year. Although you can buy additional terabytes at a discounted price. But because of the 5 terabyte limitations, we haven't deposited the entire content in DEEPN yet. And I know USU and BYU are members of DEEPN too. So I don't know how much data you have in DEEPN.
We're just doing an audit of all of our collections currently. They put in a small percentage of material that's ready to go, but once again, metadata cleanup and all the other, getting the primary depository files together we're still working through that.
So that would be like platinum level security for your archive files, so do you policy in place for choosing your data to go into the, I'm just curious, like how do you decide what goes there? It is expensive.
Exactly, and that's what we're working on developing right now. So there was an initial audit and then some things that were ready to go and put in automatically. And then they're going through the rest of it and developing policies for it and also procedures. But we have kind of a top tier and nothing system where we have it on our servers and then we have it in a little few things in deep end. So we're trying to figure out how to bridge that.
I think that's a pretty common problem. I know we encountered that as well, where we evaluated preservation workflows and platforms based on an ideal, and then when we made our selection and found out how much it costs, we were like, we can't do that, that's insane. So then we went back to trying to form a policy around different tiers and how different content would be treated. And we're kind of at the same place where we're like, well, what gets the platinum treatment versus the basic treatment versus like we don't need to preserve it. And I think I'd be interested to see a show of hands of people who have a policy in place, a digital preservation policy. Got one? Anybody? You do?
I'm pretty sure we have a
Okay. A draft? That's good. Okay. Okay. Well, I think that's another place where maybe we can help each other out, sharing those drafts or vetted policies to help each other out. I think we looked at about like 30 of them and cobbled something together, and I'd be happy to share that. Jeremy?
Because I can say about our digital preservation policy, we have a checklist that the archivists are supposed to go through to figure out if a collection really should be preserved at the highest level. So far, they've been able to go through that form, and every collection should be preserved at the highest level. So whatever that says about it.
Okay.
Anna had her hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Earlier, sorry.
Oh, I don't remember what I would have said, so just, don't worry about it.
Does anyone want to take a moment to tell us about one of your metadata migration projects and how that's been going? We heard a little bit from Amy with her migration. Has anyone else moved a large collection between standards or systems or had to clean up metadata on a large scale? Come on, I know you have.
Anna can tell you stories each one. That's all. I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't have to talk too much. We remediated all our dates, so we no longer have dates with like 2 question marks and then, or brackets around them. So that was cool. So then we were able to get, no circas. So we were able to get a better date searching widget on our digital library repository, and that happened pretty recently, and it was mostly me and a student worker pounding away at long lists of non-standard dates over a certain period of time. Yes.
Any other metadata horror stories that people want to share?
So ours isn't for collection.
We migrated our entire institutional repository, of course, to about 70,000, I guess, items. But I wasn't personally involved in all of the metadata shenanigans, but it did take months.
Yeah.
It took months. So getting the right metadata application profile was important, and being able to map from DSpace to what we were doing in Hyrax was tricky. The other thing we tried to do was to standardize the names of the departments of the university, because apparently that hadn't been done anywhere at any time. And, entomology joined with zoology, and then they changed back, and the School of Education changed its name 14 times in 3 years, and, all those kinds of things that we had to kind of take care of. So we created, we have something called the Controlled Vocabulary Manager that we use both in Oregon Digital, and we're using it for things that are not LCSH. Things we need, like somebody's name, that we need to have in there, or all of our departments are in there now, so we can use those as standard names and be able to pull those out of that vocabulary manager.
That's great.
Yeah. So going off of that is one of the big projects that I think we're getting code delivered like this week. It's very exciting. Is we're gonna start producing EAC CPF records.
Oh, great.
And so, so that's encoded archivable context for corporate bodies, persons, and families. It's kind of well, it's like authority work in cataloging, but it's for archives. And so, we've been working on this for a number of years and finally finished it this year, and that's going to help us a lot with controlling the names, because I mostly copy it right out of the same system that was producing those, but, you know, I could be off when I create metadata. And it's gonna go on to all of our finding aids, and all of that descriptive information will all use the same form of the name, and we're also gonna be sharing it with the SNAP Cooperative,
Good.
which BYU is also part of.
Great. Liz, did you have anything to add?
Oh, yeah, so ours, going along with that EAD, one of our biggest migrations has been migrating all of our XML files into archive space recently. And so we just reviewed about 1 million lines of code. We counted all of them, and we'll be starting to upload those, so that's it.
I'll just mention, in case anyone else is working on persistent identifiers, we took on this exciting project in our large-scale digitization grant to try to use ARCs to match the digital objects to the archive space records, and it's been crazy. It sort of worked in one collection, but the messier the collections got, the worse it got, and it ended up with a big cleanup project. But we learned a lot from that, and I'd be happy to talk to anybody who's interested in hearing about our methods that we applied to try to connect archive space and content DM through ARCs. It's not perfect, but we're hoping that someday we will reach that holy grail of being able to point back and forth reciprocally between our two systems and in our new dams. That's what we say every day is, in the new system, this will happen. So I think as a final question, because we're running a bit low on time, does anyone want to answer the question of what's your biggest digital asset management challenge, and is there anything MWDL can help with? Anything you'd like to talk about as a group or see on a future agenda?
Yes. It's actually a follow-up to the presentation from the bulk digitization task force, is what are we going to do to act on those recommendations? Because it kind of drove some of the conversations that I was involved in with some of those groups, such that, okay, we might need to make some changes to the metadata guidelines. Who gets to do that?
Yeah.
So I think that's an important thing that MWDL can help us with.
So actually, Cory, the bulk digitization group has been put in touch with Teresa and with those recommendations. And Teresa's actually going to be talking more tomorrow about making a call out for volunteers to serve on updating the application profile. It hasn't been updated for a number of years now, and it has to be compliant with the DPLA, and it has to work with our local partners as well. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. No, that's great.
That's kind of the direction that we're going towards. Now, if you want to talk more about that.
I was just saying, you just spoiled everything for tomorrow, but you wait a whole secret.
That's a great comment. Other things that we should think about talking about or working together on? I think someone mentioned a future session about Sambera or some of these other products. Would there be interest in learning more about those for people dipping their toes into that world?
What does it mean? What kind of infrastructure do we need to set up? What kind of expertise we need to have in our developers to build something like that? I think that would be really neat. I've always been really intrigued about why do we have to pay Ethan all this money when can we as a community, build something or do something together to try to be OAIS compliant across this region? And I don't know what kind of effort and coordination that's going to be that's gonna take, but maybe that's something that, you know, we should be looking at and starting to explore in the future. And it'd be nice, maybe we can talk to our digital preservation specialists and see what their thoughts are around this. And I don't know if any of you would be interested in exploring something like that together. I don't know what that would mean exactly in terms of manpower, women, people power, people power and time, but
Yeah.
it would, you know, we have our, you know, university IT people, we have the Center for High-Speed Computing over here for BYU, all the other institutions have similar setups in their institutions. There's something we can build together to talk to each other. I mean, that's something that I've always been curious about.
Yeah. I think Gina's point of realizing we can't do it all for everyone, you know, that's a similar realization that we came to, is that we need to have partners in whatever it is that we plan to do. So I think that's a good point.
I remember backtracking back to OAIA standards. You have to have metadata. Metadata is a big component of being compliant. You need metadata at every level. So you need item level, you need collection level and stuff like that. And that's something that's really, I think, a lot of people lack, is having the metadata also being archived. We have the objects archived, but the metadata needs to be archived too. So that's just something that is a HOD. So.
And I think preservation metadata as part of the
Yeah,
application
there's different
profile
kinds of metadata,
consideration.
So there's preservation metadata, there's descriptive metadata, the METs and stuff like that. You know, there's a lot of different levels, and that's, I think, one of the biggest hangups for smaller institutions as well as some of the larger institutions, because it has to be good metadata, but it has to be the right kind of too. So.
And then you have to have a process to extract the metadata in the file.
Yeah, and we'll keep it together too. So, like I said, if you 50 years, 100 years down the road, you can find this in context, this object in context with the other objects and how it fits into the larger or the smaller picture. So it's kind of a package thing. So it's this how deep you go into the metadata is the time's consuming, obviously, to many other things.
Anna?
I will say again, Samvera Connect, the workshop schedule is posted. One of them is gonna be Introduction to Samvera. So I'll just plug that again, but it really looks to me like there are gonna be a lot of introductory type workshops there. So if people are curious, just you know, plan out your October and come back.
Not in the heat, hopefully it'll be cooler.
Lovely, the leaves will be changing colors.
Well, thanks for a productive discussion. I'll mention that there are notes for this session in particular. If you think of anything or you want to link to something you've done or your system, we can share that link with the group if you don't already have it. But thank you very much for your participation.